As the decade of the 2010s are coming to a close, I thought it'd be a good time to talk about rivalries. These teams have met each other multiple times in the playoffs, there's been some bad blood between them, and overall, it brought out some incredible performances from incredible players. These teams also represented this era pretty well, an era where we saw a change of playstyle, the three-point explosion, and more movement from superstars than ever before. Anyway, without further ado, here are the 10 greatest playoff rivalries from the 2010s. Honorable mention to the OKC-Golden State rivalry. They only met each other one time in the playoffs, and it could have been one of the greatest rivalries ever. Two extremely talented teams with homegrown superstars from the draft going at it. But then, yeah. Once Durant joined the Warriors, it wasn't really a rivalry anymore. Number 10, Golden State vs San Antonio. This rivalry first started in 2013. The Spurs recently retooled their team and was on a mission to reclaim their championship glory. Standing in their way in the second round was a young, up-and-coming squad led by a young, rising superstar in Steph Curry. At this time, the Warriors were nothing more than a young team who recently rebuilt and made the playoffs for the first time since 2007. However, it was a very close series, with the Spurs winning in 6. The next time they met, it was 4 years later in 2017. The Warriors were now the most dominant force in the league and ultimately swept the Spurs. If Kawhi didn't get injured by Zaza, it might have been a different story. Then in the following year, 2018, Kawhi was sitting out again in a controversial year where fans were wondering why he wasn't playing. They weren't sure what was going on with his hamstring or his other injuries. The Spurs would lose in 5 despite a heroic performance by LaMarcus Aldridge. So at the end of the day, unfortunately, we never saw these two teams play each other at full strength. Number 9, Cleveland vs Boston. Their first meeting of the decade was all the way back in 2010. It was the last year of LeBron's first stint in Cleveland, where the Cavs won 61 games and claimed the number 1 seed. Once again, he would fall to the Boston Celtics. It was this series where everyone believed LeBron gave up in Game 5. A few months later, he would join the Miami Heat. However, in the later part of the decade, we saw LeBron return back to Cleveland, and once again, his rivalry with the Celtics revived. This time, it was LeBron who was the veteran superstar with the more experienced team, while the Celtics were the young guns. In 3 of the next 4 years, the Cavs would defeat the Celtics in the playoffs. In 2018, it was a super close series going back and forth the entire way, but a 35-point game by LeBron closed them out in Game 7. Number 8, Miami vs San Antonio. The Spurs and Heat met each other twice in the finals during this decade. While the rivalry was short-lived, it was intense when it happened. The veteran Spurs reached the finals in 2013, 6 years after their previous appearance in 2007, where they coincidentally swept LeBron. Now, with the Miami Heat, LeBron had arguably the greatest individual season of his career, where he won the MVP and finished second in Defensive Player of the Year voting. On the other hand, the Spurs saw a young stud rising up the ranks, and at just 21 years old, Kawhi Leonard took the responsibility of defending the best player in the NBA. A few missed free throws down the stretch and one of the greatest shots in finals history helped Miami mount a furious comeback, ultimately taking the series in 7. The next year was a different story though, as a rejuvenated Spurs team trampled through the playoffs and got their revenge on the Heat. Afterwards, LeBron would leave Miami and return back to Cleveland, ending the Heat dynasty and this rivalry. Till this day, neither team has made it back to the finals. Number 7, Memphis vs the LA Clippers. This was also a short-lived rivalry, but it seemed like it lasted longer than it did, as the two teams only faced each other twice in the decade. However, they were two very intense series, with both teams barely scrapping out one victory each. In 2012, the Clippers were the new kids on the block, with the recently acquired Chris Paul along with a rising Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan. The Clippers shocked the Grizzlies with a 27-point comeback in Game 1. They would win in 7 games, but in the year after, they would fall in 6. These two series featured a ton of physical play down low, with Randolph, Gasol, Griffin, and Jordan fighting for position. These two teams were on the rise, and everyone assumed they would play each other many times in the future. At one point, they were the most evenly matched teams in the West, which made their series so much more exciting. However, after 2013, they surprisingly never met in the playoffs again. Number 6. Miami vs. Boston. Another rivalry that ended way too soon, and another one that includes LeBron James. With the arrival of LeBron to Miami, they finally had the firepower and talent to compete with the Boston Celtics. In 2011, they found instant success, dominating the Celtics in 5 games in the second round. However, the year after was much more difficult. In a tough 7-game series, the Heat were on the verge of elimination, at one point being down 3 games to 2. Throughout the series, we saw some insane level of play. Rajon Rondo scored 44 points in Game 2, his best game of his career. Then in Game 6, down 3 games to 2 with his back against the wall, LeBron scored 45 points, tying the series up to force a Game 7. Miami would go on to win that game and the championship, the first one of the Big Three era. For this Boston team, it was their last chance, their last year to reclaim the title, but they fell short. Number 5. OKC vs. Memphis. One of the more underrated rivalries of the decade, two teams who rose to prominence during the 2010s. The Thunder and Grizzlies faced each other 3 times, with the Thunder winning 2 of the 3 matchups. 2 of the series went to 7 games. In 2011, the Grizzlies, who recently knocked out the first-seeded Spurs, were riding a wave of momentum. Some believe they were poised to make the conference finals. They would eventually, but not this year. The young, up-and-coming Thunder stopped their run. It was here where everyone believed the Thunder were going to be the team of the future. Fast forward to 2013, and we saw the Grizzlies get the best of them, as OKC could not recover with Westbrook sitting out with a knee injury. Then 1 year later in 2014, they played in one of the greatest first-round matchups in history. 4 of the 7 games went into overtime. Keep in mind, this was Durant's MVP year, so if they lost in the first round, it would have been terrible. And they were on the verge of being knocked out too. But after being down 3-2, the Thunder recovered, winning the next 2 games and the series. Nowadays, with both teams blowing it up and with none of their star players on the team anymore, this rivalry is over, for now. Number 4. OKC vs. San Antonio. This was a battle between old school and new school. The Spurs revamped their team to combat the new wave of stars coming in, and they were still winning despite getting older. In 2012, the Spurs swept the first 2 rounds, and it looked like they were going to sweep the Thunder as well, winning the first 2 games of the series. However, the Thunder stormed back and won 4 straight, cementing themselves a spot in the NBA Finals. But that was short-lived. 2 years later, a hungry Spurs team was motivated to get back to the finals after losing to Miami the previous year. With an old Tim Duncan leading the way, along with a more mature Kawhi Leonard, beating OKC, beating Miami, and winning the championship. Fast forward another 2 years, and this time, the Spurs looked much different. Their previous ball movement and team-oriented playstyle was replaced with a lot of heavy isolations from Kawhi and LaMarcus Aldridge. This time, Westbrook and Durant outplayed them, along with their bigs dominating the glass. Unfortunately, with the Thunder losing Durant and Westbrook and the Spurs losing Kawhi Leonard and their older guys retired, this rivalry ended way too soon. Number 3. Miami vs. Indiana. The biggest Eastern Conference rivalry was definitely between these 2 teams. Starting in 2012, we saw the rise of a young Pacers team who looked like a complete powerhouse from top to bottom. Defensively, they ranked first in 2013 and 2014. But for 3 straight years, they would fall to the Miami Heat, as it was clear that offensively, Miami had a level that the Pacers could never reach. This rivalry had a lot of impact on certain players' careers too, and their legacy. We saw the rise of Paul George into a star and the fall of Roy Hibbert. Dwayne Wade had some of the best games of his career against the Pacers. After the fall of the Celtics, the Pacers were the only Eastern Conference team who really gave the Heat a challenge. The 2 teams had a tremendous amount of respect for each other, as evident by their on-court endeavors. It was also quite entertaining to watch Lance Stephenson's personal rivalry with LeBron, even though it was a one-sided affair. After 2014, the Pacers broke up their team following Paul George's injury. They were still very young, so maybe they broke it up too fast, but the waning chemistry and the lack of camaraderie ultimately led to their demise. Number 2, Golden State vs Houston. From the 2014-15 season until 2018-19, the Rockets played the Warriors 4 times in the playoffs and they lost every single series. Granted, the Warriors were far ahead of anybody else in the conference, and in some years, like in 2018, the Rockets did better against them than everyone else. If it wasn't for Chris Paul's injury, maybe we would have seen a different champion that year. While they haven't beaten the Warriors, they've always made a valiant effort. This rivalry is also a good reminder of how much the game has changed. Both the Rockets and the Warriors are poster boys for the evolution of the NBA game. The Rockets with their heavy reliance on threes and shots in the paint, and the Warriors with their relentless ball movement and motion offense. Although that kinda slowed down when Kevin Durant joined them. Anyway, this is the only rivalry on this list that's likely going to continue into the 2020s, as both teams are still contending, so future matchups are probably gonna happen soon. And finally, number 1, you know what it is, Cleveland vs Golden State. 4 straight years of meeting in the finals, one of the greatest comebacks of all time, 2 star-studded teams with their legacies on the line. The Cavs-Warriors rivalry will go down in history as a top 5 rivalry ever. With the Warriors taking 3 of the 4 championships, they came out on top, but at the same time, they were heavily favored every year. Regardless of injuries, it was a huge surprise the Cavs even took 1. Unfortunately, we probably won't see this rivalry again, considering the Cavs blew up their team. We'll still see the LeBron vs Golden State rivalry though, but this time it's gonna be in the West. Anyway, that's all folks. Those were, in my opinion, the 10 greatest playoff rivalries of the 2010s. Let me know your thoughts on these matchups, and do you think another rivalry should have been on the list? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.